Hello everyone, and welcome back to the second part of this tutorial, this standard operating procedure tutorial for the Inibuilds A300 A310. The previous tutorial did covered everything from cold and dark to aligning on the runway, and here we are now on the runway at Gatwick, ready to fly to Lisbon, Portugal. So there we are. Let's start where we left it. We just landed on the runway, did all the pre-departure checks, and we're ready for takeoff. So takeoff is rolling takeoff is the discretion of the captain. We will announce takeoff. The pilot flying clock will start. So here we were running a chrono for engine warm-up. It's been long enough. So we will start the clock once we announce takeoff. Intermediate thrust setting. PF progressively adjusts and stabilizes engine thrust from idle to about 40%. In reality, actually, I believe in this A300 and A310, there was no need to stabilize because the engine spooled up very slowly. So that wasn't necessarily done by all airlines. Now, brakes will be released. Go levers will trigger, so the go levers are here at the back, so you can activate them by finding that click spot over here, but Inibuilds very kindly added something a little bit more simple, which is a hidden click spot on this screw, and that's the same thing that the go levers over here would do. So we would trigger that. Commander 1 keeps his hand on the throttles until V1 is reached without interfering with the throttle movement, and PF applies sufficient forward control column until 80, so we will hold the column forward until 80 knots, then release it progressively to shift the neutral position by 100 knots. Now, directional control, we use the rudder pedals to keep directional controls. PF and D, we will check and scan and initiate that what comes up in the on the FMA is correct. Thrust, SRS, and runway or heading. So these are the annotations that are going to come up here. We then check that takeoff N1 is set prior to reaching 80 knots. So we have the bug here, the red bug, 98.2, so we need to check that we reach 98.2 prior to reaching 80 knots. We then announce thrust set, airspeed and engine instruments, we scan and making sure that there's no exceedances. When speed is 100 knots on the BFD, we will announce 100 knots. Normally there's a cross check between the two speed indications to make sure that there's no unreliable speed problems. And then V1 will initiate, VR will initiate rotate, and then we perform the rotation. We initiate the rotation with positive control column input to achieve a continuous rotation rate of about 3 degrees per second towards a pitch attitude of 15 degrees, 12.5 degrees if one engine is failed. We avoid spoiler extensions on the ground, so we don't use too much aileron, otherwise, well, let's see if we can see, when you use too much aileron, the spoilers extend. So we try and avoid that, and after liftoff we follow the SRS pitch command bar. So we first pitched up to 15 degrees regardless of what the FD, the flight directors, are doing, and then we settle. Once the flight directors settle, we follow that for SRS, which means keeping the speed, the V2 plus whichever other value will be. Now, at that point, when we have a positive climb, we then order gear up, disarm the ground spoilers. Now, this one, of course, it's incredibly high in workload because normally it's performed by 2 pilots. So there are certain things like the spoilers and the exterior lights that you could definitely leave after you've engaged the autopilot. So we'll try and do that. We'll get the landing gear up, then we'll activate the autopilot, and then we will perform the other actions. So let's set the next page. And let's get ready to go. So spool them up a little bit. Release the parking brake. We'll put this one so you can see a little bit better. Press the takeoff button and we have takeoff. So we start the timer. There we go. Takeoff. Light forward pressure. Keep the center line. There we go. We have takeoff thrust set. 80 knots. Release the forward pressure. 100 knots. Checked. V1. Rotate. Lift off up to 15 degrees. Positive climb we can see here and here. Gear up. And then we settle onto the flight directors. Use the trim if needs be. (1,000 feet) we can activate the autopilot. At this point we disarm the speed brake as we said, and we turn the lights off. We can turn all the lights off, we don't need to keep the landing light, not in the UK at least. And then the thrust reduction altitude, we see this is already reverted to climb thrust automatically. It's switched from flex takeoff to auto, and we check, otherwise we would press it automatically, the climb thrust. We check that we have profile thrust and profile climb. We've already passed the first step. There was an F, a green F there, for flat retraction. We are above the S, so we can retract the slats as well. So slats retracted. And the slats are retracting. We're going to put the gear to neutral, so press on this one and leave it in the mid position, so it's no longer hydraulically powered. And we're now reaching 4,000 feet. Now this is set as a constraint on the flight plan, but unlike more modern planes, the autopilot would not respect that 4,000 automatically. We need to make sure that constraints are entered on the FCU. Otherwise, the plane is going to bust them. So after takeoff, APU bleed as required. APU bleed is off. The APU is off. Ignition, we leave it off. Ice protection, we don't need it. The outside temperature is still 18, so we leave it as it is. Signs stay on. The TCAS, it is set to TRA, and we can do the after takeoff climb checklist down to the line. After takeoff climb, slats and flaps are retracted. We can see that 0. Landing gear is up in neutral, packs are on, and the altimeters, so the line will be here between packs and altimeters. So after takeoff climb checklist down to the line complete. At this point we check reaching the proper altitude according to airline policy, local regulation. We turn off the landing lights as we said. Here we can do it straight away. Normal climb mode is profile thrust and profile climb. At the moment we have profile speed and profile alt because we are level. So let's pretend we've been cleared to a higher altitude, let's say 15,000. we select 15,000, the plane doesn't go automatically, we need to make sure we pull the knob. So we don't go on top, we go here, we pull, and then we're going into profile thrust, profile climb as expected. FMA indication, so we just announced them. The clear altitude is on the PFD, so we check that this one makes sense. We've been directed to 15,000. Now if it was 15,000 in the UK, it would be flight level 150. So what we do, we put the altimeter on standard, and at that point the FMA shows flight level 150. This one we need to put it manually to standard. There we go. Now the PF CDU should be preferably set on progress page, but other pages such as flight plan may be selected. So here we're gonna put progress page to monitor the climb. Climb speed modification for speed change is required by ATC for turbulence or reparation reasons. Select new speed using FMS tactical mode. Now, ATC might ask you to climb at a specific speed. So let's say they asked you, for the sake of the demonstration, 260. Now you could click this, pull this, and then select 260. But then you will revert to level change. And we don't want that. We want to stay in profile. But we cannot select the speed. So what we're going to do, that's different from modern Airbus. So what we want to do, we do FMS tactical mode here, and we can speed instead of econ climb speed, which is a speed that is calculated based on your cost index to be fuel efficient. And here you can see after 10,000 feet, below 10,000 feet, it was 250. Above it goes to the actual climb speed, which is 325. But if you wanted to change that, you could enter, let's say 280. ATC gives us 280. We put it in the speed box and we click on it. At this point, we are going to be doing 280. And that's very handy as well to increase your rate of climb, because of course if you climb at a slower speed you climb a lot faster. This is already a rocket, so this is quite ridiculous, to be honest, 6,000 feet per minute. So we very rarely need to do it on the A300 and the A310. Once we have ATC telling us to resume our own speed, we can just press econ and that's it. Normally I would suggest to avoid max climb speed, because then you literally turn into a space shuttle. There's absolutely no need on this plane. We are above 10,000 feet, so let's see if that's all there. Well, let's turn the seatbelt signs off. We're reaching 15,000, so we can clear ourselves to the final altitude, which you can check on the progress page, is 340. 340. As you can see, we're now in vertical speed because we arrested the climb. We now pull, set profile, and we have profile thrust, profile climb, flight level 340. Now, if ATC clears the aircraft to intended cruise flight level or above, there is no need to modify the cruise flight level inserted in the init page. So this means if ATC gave you a higher flight level, so let's say we put 360, once we pull, automatically in the FMS our cruise level is changed to 360, new cruise alt 360, so we don't need to do anything. While if the opposite was to happen, and if they told us, you know what, now I know you filed 340, but you will need to stay at 320. Once you click for that, that doesn't change. So once you get at 320, the plane will not know it is cruising. So it will not change from the climb phase to the cruise phase. So in that case, you need to change the cruise altitude manually. And you put 320 and you put it there. Okay, so this is what is explained over here. Now, we go back to 340, that's where we wanted to cruise. We pull, and that's automatically adjusted. Now, the max flight displayed on the progress page gives at least a 0.2 G bullet margin, buffer margin. It's not recommended to fly above this level. So, this is the maximum speed. I won't go in too much of a lesson of why, but if you Google coffin corner, so coffin like an actual coffin, COFFIN, corner, it will explain you why airliners have a max altitude. Okay, because, well, I don't want to explain it here. You can go and Google it. I don't want to bore you too much. Then, now altitude may be higher than the flight level limitation by out to 700 feet. The flight level limitation might still be applied. Now, there's absolutely no need, especially in the sim, to go and look for very high flight level. Also because bear in mind that the best fuel performance is obtained by flying as close as possible to the optimal flight level, not as high as possible. You can burn up to round about 5% more fuel by being 8,000 feet away from your optimal. So that means that if the optimal is at 340, if you go up to 370, you'll be burning round about 2% more fuel than you need to. So higher is not less fuel, it's not better. Stay as close as you can to the optimal flight level. But you keep monitoring this one because now you're closer to 340. We cannot switch to 350. We use only, when we fly in a certain direction, we use only odd or even numbers. So the next step will be 360. Once this one goes to 351, then we can climb to 360 to be closer to the optimal level. But again, that's beyond the scope of this tutorial. We're actually focusing on SOP, so let's continue there. After takeoff climb checklist below the line, once we set the cruise level here, or once ATC give us a flight level, we set standard, and at that point, after takeoff climb checklist below the line, imaginary line which is here, and we check altimeters. I'm pretty sure it's not spelled like that, but they've been set standard on both. Now FMS, we recopy the active flight plan if in the secondary if an immediate return flight plan has been constructed. We did that, so our second flight plan was a return to base here. So what we're going to do, we clear the secondary and then we copy the active. So now the secondary is a copy of the active in case we need some diversions or anything else. Check optimum and maximum altitude capability, which is done it. If we increase the range, yeah, we want to see a little bit more ahead of us. And once all the constraints have been cleared, so you can see in the upcoming points there's no constraint, we select airport here on the IFIS box instead of constraint to have a bit of situational awareness of potential airports to divert to in case we had some issues. Next up will be the cruise. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna skip this part and I'll see you back in the cruise. And we're back. Now we're approaching the cruise. We're nearly at 34,000 feet, so we're still in profile thrust, profile climb. And as we get there, the FMA will change profile speed and profile alt. So it's now the auto thrust is commanding thrust to maintain a certain speed, as we're now on level flight. So profile alt, and that's it, we're in the cruise. So thrust rating panel, check limiter limb mode indicating climb, set cruise if not in profile. We are in profile, but anyway, it's gone automatically to cruise. So ECAM MAMO status we review. So once again, we check here, we press the status, and it's normal, so we're good. ECAM system page, periodically review system pages, and in particular, let's have a look at them. So start this ECAM over here. Engine, oil pressure, and temperature. So everything is in the green. So oil temperature is 153, so it's good, and the pressure is high enough. Hydraulic, check fluid quantities. You can see here the fluid quantity, that's all good. Green system is lower than ground following landing gear retraction. So you can see here this is lower than the other ones, and it's normal because the landing gear is retracted. AC, generator parameters. Generators are working full whack, perfect. And we check the IDG oil temperature is in the green. DC battery charging status. We're all good, everything is in the green. Again, very simple, as long as everything is green, there's no orange stuff anywhere, you're good. Bleed, we check bleed parameters. Everything seems good. Check conditioning, check that temperature, and cabin temperature, cockpit 24 degrees, that's way too hot for me. We can adjust the cockpit a little bit because we adjusted everything before, but not this one. And pressurization. There we go, we check the PSI is 8.0, so it's below 10, the vertical speed 65, and the cabin altitude is 6,255. So this is a cabin pressure altitude, it's not your altitude, it's a fraction, always a fraction of the altitude. So that's all good. We check fuel, check distribution. So fuel is balanced. We've used a little bit more here, probably because of the APU, but it's all balanced. Flight controls, there's no unusual positions or anything. Oil quantity, we monitor. We can monitor on the, not the oil quantity, we have it actually, yeah, and that's all good. Flight process check. Flight progress should be monitored in the conventional way. So when overflying a point, so let's see, we just passed local, we check the track and distance to the next point. So the next one is going to be Coral in 346 miles. That is a bit of a way. What we can do, we can check the operational flight plan. Told us that at Lorco we should have been there "90 minutes after departure." We just passed it and we are 22 minutes after departure, so that makes sense. And then we would check the fuel. So the fuel, we have estimated fuel on board now of 14.6 and we have 15.2, so that's good. So every few waypoints we check those figures, the time and the fuel, and we check we are in line with the flight plan. Now we check also that the sum of the fuel on board and the fuel used is consistent with the fuel on board at departure. So you have the fuel used indicated here. So we have 1.8 times 2, 3.6 plus 15.2, that makes 18.8. Well, 18.85, and we had 19, so that makes sense after we burned the fuel for the taxi. So otherwise, if there was a discrepancy, it might indicate a fuel leak. And again, this is fairly redundant in the sim, and fuel leaks are luckily not. Well, I don't know actually if it's in the failures of the INI. It might be. Now, optimal flight level check. So periodically check the optimal and maximum flight level to ensure that the aircraft flies as close to the optimal flight level as practical, and that's what we discussed earlier. So progress page is now 348. So as I said, once it switches to 351, we will climb to 360. Now, navigation accuracy. Navigation accuracy must be monitored, particularly when IRS only or low is displayed on the progress page, which it isn't. Insert a VORs. Now, the way that we'll be using to check navigation accuracy is this. Insert a VOR DME ident in the FMS bearing distance to function, which is this one. Check the bearing and distance compared to the same VOR DME remotely tuned on the progress page. This one, remotely tuned on the progress page, and displayed on the DDRMI. So here, so this one is telling us that this VOR GUR, Golf Uniform Romeo, is at 10.2 miles. And this one is a distance that has a DME distance, so it's sensed by the radio equipment on board, by the radio signal sent by the VOR. While if we put the VOR here in the bearing distance, so we put GUR, we put it there, this distance is actually a distance sensed by the GPS. So we know now that the navigation tells us that we're 10 miles from GUR. As long as these two figures are close enough, then we know that the navigation accuracy given by the IRSs is good enough. So the check is satisfactory if the difference in the distance is 3 nautical miles en route. So at the moment we are 1 nautical mile, 2 nautical miles, and 1 nautical mile on approach. So if the check is satisfactory, the FMS position is reliable, so we can use the nav mode. If it wasn't, we would need to use raw data. But once again, we're in the same, so it will always be reliable, even though a certain degree of discrepancy is simulated. Now, radar tilt. Unfortunately, despite the radar tilt being indicated here, I'm not entirely sure it's modeled. Because if we tilt it down, we see exactly the same picture over here. So it doesn't really matter where we put it. Leave it 0. Cabin temperature. We monitor the cabin temperature, so regular attention should be paid to the ECAM cruise page. Now the generic page, once we deactivate all the pages on the ECAM here, a generic cruise page with different important information, so the cabin altitude, the temperature, and some engine indication, fuel flow, oil temperature, etc. are here, just to recap, to have a constant check. So we check that the passenger cabin temperature may be monitored and adjusted as necessary. It will take up to 20 minutes. Yeah, so if you want to change, it just says do not keep changing too often the temperature. Change the knobs on top and then give time to the temperature to stabilize. But 22 is perfect, so we leave it that way. Now, descent preparation. Now, this is a long flight and I have quite a while to the takeoff, the top of descent. So let's have a look. So we will start the descent quite close to Xamax. Xamax, we will be there at 11:18, so we're losing there 3,000 feet, so 9, 10 miles, 11:18, 11:15 roundabout. And at this point we are at 10 o'clock, so we have 1 hour and 15 minutes before the top of descent. So I will see you roundabout, let's say, under normal circumstances, the descent preparation and approach briefing take approximately 10 minutes. So they should be initiated approximately 80 to 100 miles before the top of descent. We'll add a bit of a comfort margin to that because I will be chatting, so it will take longer than normal. But anyway, I'll see you round about 20 minutes before the top of descent. So I'll pause the recording now, but you won't know. I will see you in a few seconds and a few hundred miles. And we're back. Now, let's start having a look at the descent preparation. Now, ICA memo page checked. So again, we check the status of the ICA memo page, review if required, take particular note of any landing capability downgrade or any other aspects affecting the approach and landing. So if we had any failures, there will be recapped here. We need to take all of that into consideration when planning the arrival. Now, but there is nothing for today. There's no failures or anything. So now we're going to check weather and landing information, check weather at alternate and destination, including runway and use. So we can make another little piece of paper there. Let's go on to ACAR main, ACAR ATC weather request. We're landing in LPPT. Requested meter, LPPT. Print. Good condition, broken at 3,310.11, so that's good. Okay, and we put that there in the corner. Now, if QFE, no, that's not used, in case the destination fuel elevation is higher than the actual cruise, so that we can ignore fuel if flight has been performed below flight level 200, so that's something else that we don't need. FMS landing data, set speed bugs on standby, attitudes, no, airspeed indicator, V up and green dot. So what we're going to do, we're going to go on to the FMC and we're going to check. Now landing is going to be 30-40, so if it was a very long runway and we were light, you could use 15-20 or use 30-40 standard. Now the FMS already calculates the V-up based on the landing weight. Our current weight is 122.2. It predicts we're going to be at 120.3, and we have already a V-up. Bear in mind, this is not a V-ref. This is already a V-up. So the wind correction is not needed unless we need an extra. So the FMS already calculates a 5 knots of or 5 knots correction from VREF to V-up, and it calculates already V-up 132. So if there was stronger winds or any other considerations related to wind, to wind shear, gusts, we would need to add an extra. But 5 for today is enough because the wind was off to the side at 11 knots. The other way we can do is can go on landing performance, and again grab the FNC data by clicking here, get an ATIS request, and in the meantime, while I was away, I did not climb to 360, but you see now the optimal has gone all the way out to 359. So we could go up to 360, but we're so close to the top of the descent that doesn't make much sense at this point. So we have the data here. We then compute, and there we go. As you can see, V up 131, so very similar to what the FMS was calculating. The VREF is 126 plus 5, 131, and that's good. So the speed here is 249 and slats retraction is 2195. So this is quite handy to remember because you know what the minimum speed is going to be once you extend the slat, and what the minimum speed is going to be once you stay at the first notch of flaps. So based on the arrival procedure, it's handy to know those figures. Now here we have those speeds. Now this is 132, 156. Okay, but we won't be using these. They will be on the speed tape anyway, so this is not the VREF or the V-up, but it's fine, we can ignore that. Now, landing configuration. So if not landing in 3040 config on the FMS approach page, select the relevant config. So There we go. So we could be selecting 1520. As you can see, the VUP is 143, but 3040 is 132. Then MDA, we need to check the MDA on the chart. So we're gonna get the relevant charts. So the airport is gonna be LPPT, which is Lisbon. The arrival was gonna be the X something Samax 1 Charlie, as we said. Of course, you can always check that. It's written there, Samax 1 Charlie, and then we're gonna land on LPPT 02. So approach is gonna be an ILS runway 02, and then we get our airport charts. There we go. So the MDA, we're gonna go and get it here for Cat 1 ILS, and the MDA is 530, and we put it there. Descent wind profile. This insertion on the descent forecast page should be made early to ensure optimum top of descent point can be recomputed and ensure that it is ahead of the present position. If no wind is inserted, wind is computed by the interpolation between cruise wind and no wind at destination. So you can see here that there is an interpolation between cruise wind and no wind at destination. You can see the figure decreases until there's no wind at destination, but we can also enter the winds. So you go on the mode page, descent forecast, and at this point we get our winds from the operational flight plan. So if we go after the plan, here at descent we have all the winds as we descend. We enter them in this format with a slash in between altitude, direction of the wind and the force of the wind. So for example, we enter anything below us, so we are climbing, we are cruising at 340, so what we can use is 310, 200 and 100. So 310 slash 256 slash 49. Then we do 200 slash 258 slash 037, and then we can do, of course, on the FNC, this one you can use it. So if you pop it out and you click on it, once it's spread around it, you can use your keyboard to type in the values, which is a little bit quicker. I just prefer doing it on the normal one. And then we do the wind at destination, which is 310 at 11. So 310 at 11. There we go. So the descent forecast has been completed. For category 2 or category 3 approach, set the DH on the FCU. So now when we do an ILS1, we use an MDA, so minimum decision altitude, and that's what we put over here. That's a barometric altitude, so it's a standard altimeter altitude. Now when we do Cat 2 or 3, we use actually a radio altimeter, so we will use a DH. But in this case, so for example, let's bring up the chart of the approach Cat 2, Cat 3. Over here you see this is actually a DH. It differs from this one. This one we use the DA, while on a Cat 2 and 3 we use a DH, which is 50 for the 3 and 100 for the 2. So that would go, we go here, but we're not using the DA, we're using an MDA, so we'll leave -5 here again. So that doesn't, it's only to avoid a warning once we get to 50 to 0 to whatever. So we leave it at -5, so it will never set off a warning. Now DH has been set on the FCU. Flight plan we check and modify. So we've already done it. So start approaching CERT. That's the point that we did at departure that we could be doing now if we didn't do on departure. So then it tells us that the FMS computes VAP based on the predicted landing weight. It is equal to VREF plus wind correction entered by the crew, which is this one, plus 5 knots as standard. This assumes auto thrust is engaged for landing. The diesel point when the aircraft should start to decelerate is computed based on the inserted flight plan route and wind profile. So that's all good. We have the computed top of descent here, and this is this little arrow pointing down. When it's a blue arrow coming from the other side is the top of climb. When it's a white arrow pointing down is the top of descent, the point at which the plane will start its descent. Now navigate, set navigate as required and check idents. If a VOR DME exists close to the airfield, it should be selected systematically and its ident should be set on the program page bearing distance to field for navigation accuracy monitoring during descent. So that's what we did earlier to check the navigation accuracy. We can do that on arrival as well. We'll see if there is a VOR in the vicinities of the airport. Like there, we go to the progress page. This is identified as Lima India Sierra. We put that there, and then we put again Lima India Sierra on the bearing distance. We check the frequency 114.8 as the second one. This is because there are more VORs called LIS, so we select the relevant one and then we check the distance. Now here it says 180 miles and here it says 180, so the navigation accuracy is spot on, so that's good. Now at this point we check the FMS flight plan, thoroughly check the whole flight plan using the scroll key. Used ND plan mode with scrolling the flight plan on the CDU, which is what we did earlier to check the whole flight plan. So we pop out the ND, we put it into plan mode, we put a more relevant zoom to check everything, and then at this point we check it against the charts we have. So the arrival starts from Xamax and then it goes all the way down to the airport. So check the flight plan. Goes to Xamax and there we go. So Xamax, we then go to Badum. Xamax already has a restriction of maximum 280, which hasn't been inserted here actually. And below flight level 290. So if we wanted, that's a restriction there, we could enter that. Speed below 280, and we can enter it in the speed. And then at or below, so the line is above the number here in the chart, so we need to be at or below 290. So we put 290 there. At that point, that restriction is there, and probably the top of descent point will have been recalculated at this point. Yeah, it's a little sooner. Okay, so let's have a look at that. Okay, so Xamax is correct. We have the constraint Badum maximum 280 and flight level 250 or below. That's correct. Umupi below 250 knots, and that's correct. Then we go to Pinim, we go to Papa Tango 414 about 7,000, and we're good. Odlix, no, Odlix is on the other side, so there's the arrow there. Ekmar below 220 knots and above 4,000 feet. PT 420 below 220 and above 4,000. PT 421 max 200 knots and above 4,000, so 6,000 is good. And P6 maximum 180 knots and above 4,000 4480. Another check that you can do which is a bit tedious though. It's easy on the A320, but it's a bit tedious here because it's on two different pages, is to check that you can lose the altitude it says you're gonna lose. Now, we know the rule of thumb of 3, so we know that to lose 5,000 feet, in this case, we know times 3, we need at least 50 miles, or 5,000 feet, we need 15 miles. So we want to check that you have that distance between waypoints. Okay, so that's definitely correct, because it's, well, there is 81 miles, so we know we can do that. Then we're losing 4,000, we need 16, and we have 22. Then we're losing 5,000, we need 15, and we have 33, and so forth and so on. So if you have time in the cruise, just check there. This FMS is really good at calculating all of that. It's difficult that it makes mistakes, very rare, but it's another check, and it's quite useful to know that you are in a comfortable position. So you can plan whether you need brakes, speed brakes, or descending earlier, and so forth and so on. Now, where were we? There, secondary flight plan. If weather is okay, secondary flight plan can be used for setting another possible approach and or runway as a backup at the destination airfield. So if, for example, you're coming down and there is an airfield with 2 runways, it happens very often in the States where they give you a side step. And especially in a single pilot environment, side step is very difficult because you need to maneuver the plane, try and change the ILS frequencies and etc. And it's not ideal. So what you could do, you could enter in the secondary flight plan, you could go in the secondary flight plan and then select a different arrival. So instead of runway 02, maybe the wind is changing, you can select a different approach. So in case they give you a different runway, you can just activate the secondary instead of having to fiddle with the primary. But whilst we're here, let's set the ILS. So ILS is going to be 109.1, it's already here, and then the course is going to be 025 degrees. Perfect. Now, secondary flight plan has been done. Approach briefing. It is recommended to use FMS page and ND as a guide for descent and approach briefing. Main points to be covered are navigate, so we can discuss that. ILS, VOR selection procedure and crossing altitude. So we would be checking the crossing altitudes there. Makes sense. The final intercept point, so the FAF here is PSX, and the point at which we'll start going down the glide slope. PSX, the most important thing is to check that that makes sense. So it says PSX 4,480, which is weird, because we should be at PSX at 4,000. I think it's confusing. It is confusing something. So we can see. Okay, we can change that. Instead of seeing at or above, we can say at PSX at altitude 4,000. See if that changes the top of descent. No, it's fine, because there were some extra miles, as we said, between the first constraint and the other one. So we had 33 miles to lose 5,000 feet at a certain point, so it's absorbing the extra descent there. So at this point we have PSX at 4,000 feet, which is looking a lot better. So much so for saying that normally gets it right. And then the next is star approach transition and missed approach. So we look at the star. We've already reviewed all the different constraints. One thing that we need to keep in mind here is the speeds. Now we know from the takeoff approach page here that that I don't believe is the minimum speed. So green dot speed, well, it looks like the green dot green dot speed is 247. So which means technically that once we need to be below 247, so here around 250, no, 220 here, we will need to be on ready on slats 15. Because we cannot do 220 without any slats out. So we need to put the slats out 220. The minimum speed with slats out, with only slats 15, it will be 193. So we can do keep slats out only all the way up to here. And then PESEX is 11 mile before touchdown on a 3-degree slope. So we will put flaps 15, so we will go in config 1515 just before going down on the glide slope, and then we'll slow down below 193. So we check that, we check the approach, as we said, we just discussed it, 11 miles, just before PESEX, a couple of miles before, we'll put config 1515, intercept the glide slope, start going down, it's a standard glide slope, 3 degrees, and it's not offset, so that's all good. Missed approach, we have it here, so we recheck again, the frequency is 109.125, 4,000 feet is the intercept altitude, we have airport elevation 350, that's something that we need to put there. I said landing elevation, we need to set it, and I checked it, but I didn't set it, did I? That's why we read the chart. Airport elevation 355. There we go, we set it there. Then the missed approach is climb straight ahead to flight level 070. So we need to remember 070 is going to be our missed approach altitude. Then fuel prediction. Fuel needed for diversion, we knew that we needed 3, I think. And we have 6.5 on board, and we're planning to arrive with, what was the remaining? Fuel prediction, there we are, on the progress page we have, I couldn't find it, it's in a different page compared to the A320, so fuel prediction over here, we're planning to arrive with 6.5, so with plenty for the diversion, that was about 3.5. Runway conditions is, I believe it's dry, it's good weather on arrival. And there we go, so yeah, running condition is good. Fuel needed for diversion, we checked it. Perfect. All good. Descent clearance at this point, we will obtain the descent clearance. When the descent clearance is given by the ATC, we modify, we put the altitude. So let's say ATC gives us, when ready, descend to flight level 150. We put there 15,000. We pull, and on the FMA, we see appearing P descent. That means that the descent is armed, and the plane will not start descending until it crosses the top of descent. So P thrust, P descent armed, immediate descent prompt is displayed on the FMC. So if they told you immediate descent to 150 instead of descend when ready, you could go on the flight plan page and click here on the first point, immediate descent. At this point, it is commanding a vertical speed of minus 1,000 feet per minute until it rejoins the originally calculated path from the top of descent. There we go, we're now descending. We'll check the anti-ice. It's not many clouds at the moment, so we can leave it off. Ignition, it will need to be to continually light prior to engine anti-ice selection, but we don't need it now. Descent will be initiated automatically in profile mode at the top of descent point, provided a lower altitude has been preset on the FCU. Of course, if we cross the top of descent without having selected a lower altitude, it wouldn't have started the descent. The FMS will hold the cruise flight level until the top of descent. 30 seconds before reaching top of descent, VDES will flash to indicate that the descent will be initiated without any further guards. But anyway, we started already. Now, if ATC requires an early descent, so what we just discussed, the descent may be initiated immediately before reaching top of descent by pressing immediate descent prompt on the CDU. In this case, the descent will be performed at 1000 feet per minute until the pre-computed path is reached. If the descent is delayed by ATC when passing the top of descent, so if we didn't select a lower altitude, once we passed the top of descent, the aircraft the aircraft stays at the cruise altitude as no lower altitude has been selected on the FCU. Decel prompt would be displayed in line 1 right, so it would be displayed on the CDU. So over here, instead of having immediate descent, that would have changed to decel. If we press that, now what happens? We have a top of descent, and that's the point at which we should start descending. ATC is not authorized us. Now we're in a situation where we're gonna accumulate excess energy, so we'll be too fast and too high, and we won't have enough time to go down. So how do we deal with that? We need to manage our energy. So we have too much energy because we're still too high. We need to try and reduce energy in another way. So what the plane does, once you press that prompt decel, the plane reduces the speed to green dot. So it bleeds off energy by reducing the speed. So once we finally get our descent clearance, then we can catch up by going down, by gaining speed as we go down. Okay, so make sure you do that. If you have a late clearance and you're passing the top of descent, make sure that you reduce your speed to green dot so that you're in a better position to then catch up later. That's it. At this point, descent monitoring, so PF CDU onto the progress page. So we're pilot flying, we leave it on the progress page because we want to monitor. Now the VNAV of this plane is not as as accurate or as elegant as more modern planes like the A320 or the 737. So it needs to be constantly monitored. It can happen that it leaves you also fairly high on approach. Just because the speeds are in the flight plan, it does not necessarily mean it's going to make those speeds. So we check progress page, and we always constantly monitor the VDEV, vertical deviation. Minus 830, it means that we are lower than we should be. You can see the magenta diamond is above us, so the path calculated by the computer is above us. So we're in a good position. We're lower than we should be, which is a lot better than being higher than you should be. Then also we check the distance to destination. So we're checking that it makes sense what we need to lose. So for example, now we have 27,000 feet, rule of 3, we know we need 81 miles plus 10 to decelerate. We need 91 miles to destination, and we have 121. So we can always do that gross error check to make sure we're in a good position. Now the pilot not flying CDU will be on the flight plan. When flying in nav mode, profile mode is most probably used. PDES indicated on the FMA, and we have it there. The aircraft descends along the descent flight path. VDEV is provided on the progress page. Yeah. And maybe thus monitored. All constraints of the flight plan will be taken into account by the FMS. So let's activate the constraints so we can see now Badum below. Let's remove that. Below 25,000. That was the one that we had on the SID. And we're at Badum. and we're gonna make the below 25,000, and it was also 280 knots, and we are at 280 knots, so we're all good. Now when flying in heading, if we were flying in heading mode, because ATC is vectoring us, mode out of the lateral flight plan, profile descent should not be used. If you're in heading, don't use the vertical deviation, because of course you could be cutting a lot of miles when they vector you. At that point, you can do the gross check on the bearing distance and then manage the descent either in flight change or in vertical speed. So if you activate level change, the plane will slow down the engines to idle, and it will start going down pretty much like a brick. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. Otherwise, you can do vertical speed to descend down a 3 degrees path. So you know your speed, 360. You divide this by 2 and you add a 0, and you know that's the vertical speed that you should be doing to go down at a 3 degrees path. So we can decide that as well. But again, we're now sidetracking beyond the scope of the tutorial. So we just keep it on profile. We're now 2,200 feet below profile. Again, it's okay. It doesn't hurt too much. If it gets too wild, then we might want to shallow manually the descent. Now also, the level of symbol here is very handy always to know at which point we're gonna level off. Now, it's saying that we will reach what we have entered now, so the flight level 150, just after Pinim. Pinim we need to be at 140. So that makes sense. You're round about there, so we'll probably increase the descent. Now, Umupi, we need to be at 196. And we're 19 miles. So that's a slightly weird computation, but it's all okay. Gross check tells us that we're good. Now, you can also do, from time to time, during stabilized descent, select FBA on PFD and check the remaining distance. That's another thing that you can do by selecting the FBA. But the FBA is not modeled in this plane, so we can't use that really. You could use the flight path vector there, but there's no point, it's too much. So when each new descent clearance is given by ATC, we set it back on FCU. So let's say now we're clear to 10,000. We annotate the FMA. Now, here, one thing to keep in mind is the transition altitude. Transition altitude is 4,000. So as long as we're clearing ourselves to above 4,000, we keep the altimeters to standard. Once we clear ourselves below 4,000, we'll need to set the QNH. A good habit to take is, once you know the QNH, in this case 1015, you can set it on the standby altimeter so that you can keep an eye on what difference that makes in altitude. Because if it was a very, very high QNH, like 1018, you could notice now that you are actually 500 feet higher, 400 feet higher than you think. So then you could of course make adjustment to your descent according to that. But it will be 1015, so that's practically identical to what we have here. Then other things, monitor reducing FM indication, profile mode descents perform the idle thrust, maintaining the required descent path by pitch control. Thus the aircraft speed will vary with the pitch and is not directly controlled. If the speed varies by more than 20 knots from the FMS peak target, the FMS peak target is this blue bag, and if the speed varies by more than 20 knots, because of course the plane needs to adjust the altitude by using the pitch, but if it sways too much from the commanded, let's say, airspeed, it might give you a message here on the scratch pad. It will tell you if it's too fast, it will tell you more drag, at which point you use a little bit of your speed brakes, or it could tell you less drag, just in case you have the speed brakes out, and then you put them back in. Okay, but at the moment we're perfectly bang on the money, 250, we're descending 250. Umupi was predicting 196, and we're just passing it, and 192. So it's doing very well. Now, if an increased rate of descent is desired, as we discussed earlier, increase descent speed by using level change and selected speed, like I showed a minute ago, if comfort and ATC permit. This is economically better in terms of time and fuel. Also, this is a suggestion: if aircraft is high with high speed, it is more efficient to keep high speed until level off and then decelerate, rather than to mix descent and deceleration. Simply because if you need to descend faster, keep the speed as high as you can for as long as you can, because drag increases with speed. So the faster you go, the faster you can descend. If you first slow down and then descend, you're inevitably gonna descend slower. Another thing to note here: with anti-ice on, engine thrust is increased, which will reduce the descent path angle at idle. So if you're descending at idle, like we're not, but if you were at idle, look what happens once you put the engine well, now it's not steady, so I cannot demonstrate that. But what happens when you activate the engine anti-ice? Because engine anti-ice takes bleed air from the engines, it needs to increase the N1. Normally not by much. Now, this is the plane just trying to maintain the correct speed. As it went down, then it became too slow. So once you activate the engine anti-ice, the N1 increases a little bit. So if you're going down at idle, that idle will need to increase. So the plane will descend a little bit slower. So what it's telling you here, you can compensate this loss of vertical speed by an increase of descent by using half of the speed brakes. So if you use the anti-ice, you might need to use up to half of the speed brake to compensate for the increase in idle. Radar tilts, we said that, well, it's not perfectly modeled, so we can leave it where it is. EGPWS, terrain on ND. Do we need terrain? We said that there is a little bit of terrain around the area, but nothing worrying because we are actually coming from the side of the sea. So we can keep the terrain only on the pilot not flying. Altimeters set. So set the QNH. At this point, let's clear ourselves to 4,000, which is the final intercept altitude, and we can put the altimeter to the destination altimeter. So we just wind it down. (1015). When reaching terminal area, approximately 50 miles from destination, which is about now, cross-check the navigation accuracy again. So we are 9.2 from the VOR, and in the progress page it says 9. 9, so navigation accuracy is good. Standard approach. So let's have a look at the approach. Now, the following approach procedure assumes AP is engaged in profile mode and auto thrust engaged, which is the recommended procedure. Now, ignition as required. Select ignition, Again, if there's heavy rain, the runway contaminated with standing water or severe turbulence. None of that, so we can leave ignition 2 off. Now this initial approach, pretty much this checklist, this part of the standard procedures, let's say, starts below 10,000. That's where we put the seatbelts up. Let's anticipate it a little bit because there's quite a lot of workload to go through. So we put the signs, seatbelts on, exterior lights, set runway turn off lights at flight level 100 and landing lights at flight level 100. Use landing lights as per company policy regulatory recommendations. So for example, I don't know, the vast majority of pilots in BA, for example, to give you one operator, sets the landing lights only when they go down the glide slope, not even before that. Now that's very personal. 10,000 feet again is for the US, while in Europe you can pretty much do whatever you want. What we're gonna do, the runway turn off lights. They are on the gear, so they're not gonna go on now. They will go on automatically only when we extend the gear. So we reduce the workload a little bit. We put those on, and then we need to worry only about the landing lights and the nose gear light. This one we keep it. This one will be the same. It doesn't come on until the landing gear is extended. But the vast majority of pilots use the nose or the landing gear light as a signal that they've received the clearance for landing. So only when they say clear to land, runway 02, then you will put the lights on as a reminder that you have been cleared to land. It's very often, quite common to not remember whether you were actually cleared or not. We are on the profile, we keep monitoring the profile all the way down. The next waypoint, which is PT 414, we should be at 113, and we are now at 117, so we're good. Then positioning, check the aircraft position for a smooth transition to the approach. So this is just at 30 miles to touchdown. We should do at 9,000 feet and 250. So you can go on the progress page. We are now 50 miles and we are at 11,000 feet. So that's good. Rule of thumbs again, 11 times 3, 33, and we are 49 miles, so that's good. Navcom frequency check set VHF as required. Of course, we would tune the radios for ATC. At this point, we would tune a secondary radio for the for approach. We'll probably be on approach already. We'll set tower and then ground frequency, so we can just switch without having to look at the charts. ILS frequency and course is set 109.10 and 025. VOR nav ILS switch to ILS as required. So once we're close to the ILS approach, instead of the nav here, we will switch to ILS. We can do that now already. It gives you the scale, so deviation from the ILS, and more importantly, it gives you the DMA distance from the ILS. So switch that. Approach speed, nothing, that's all good. Navigation accuracy, we just checked it. Radial tilt adjust, ND set and check. PF ND mode map for ILS approach, and we have it. ND range, we select 15, of course, to have a little bit more. Now, what we were saying, you see green dot, that is one thing that I'm not. Oh, you see, it has recalculated. I thought it was crazy that green dot was 245. It didn't make any sense. It recalculated closer to the airport. So now green dot is a more reasonable 205. So we can stay with slat and flaps up all the way to 205. Now, the only thing that happens once you switch to ILS is that then you lose the vertical scale of the deviation from the path. So you might want to put ILS when you're a little closer to the procedure. Now DH check, both Commander 1 and Commander 2 confirm DH setting on IFI's control box in accordance with company's policy. As we said earlier, for Cat 1 precision approaches or non-precision approaches, set the Cat 1 DH or MDA using the altimeter amber index and set the DH of -5 on the IFIS box. So we can set the NDA using the altimeter under index over here. So we set the 530, we can also put it there. So let's say 530 there. Approach checklist complete. So let's do the approach checklist. Approach checklist. Signs are set, so the signs are on. Briefing is confirmed. ECAM status is checked. Altimeters set 1015, set both. Minimums we set it here 530 and we set it in the box 530. Ignition as required is off. Landing elevation we set it and it was 350. And we have it. Approach checklist complete. Final approach. The following procedure assumes an alias approach will run autopilot engaged and again like we said before. Conducting a stabilized approach is recommended. The objective is to be stabilized on the final descent path at V up in the landing configuration at 1000 feet above airfield in instrumental conditions or 500 feet in visual condition. To be stabilized, all the following conditions must be achieved prior to or upon reaching the stabilization height, which is the aircraft is on correct lateral and vertical flight path, the aircraft is in the desired landing configuration, the power is stabilized, the aircraft is trimmed to maintain V up on the desired glide path, and so forth and so on. So, FCU, we put green dot speed. Now, we don't need to select the green dot speed on the FCU. Now we have 220 commanded. To command green dot speed, all we do, once we want to decelerate to green dot speed because we're close enough, we go on to the approach page and we press final approach. We are now in approach mode. As you can see, the blue line here commanding 220 has disappeared and the plane is targeting green dot. So we can keep the speed in managed without managing it manually until later on. Heading selector as required. What we're going to do, we're just going to put runway heading, which we said is 025 in case of go around or in case of anything else. Let's put the lights on now that we're intercepting. Okay, now we are on a straight line for the approach. So this is the final course. So we can already now select ILS and then press land. At this point, the plane will go and intercept the localizer. It's already on lock star because we were close enough. If we weren't, had we not been that close, it would have gone lock. So nav green, lock blue, which is armed, and once he captured lock, it would have turned lock star, which is intercepted, and now is getting onto lock. We said that we need to be at PESEX at 4,000, in a good position to do that because we're at 5,000 now. DME is 17,000, so the speed is good. A good rule of thumb is we want to be at 200 at 10 DME, and then we decrease with the speed, so 190 and 9 DME, 180 and 8 DME. That's a very simple rule of thumb to control your speed, rule of thumb. Now, heading selection as required. Airspeed we check below VFE. VFE is the extension speed of the next notch of flaps. The maximum speed at slats 15 is 250. So we need to make sure that we're below that. We are 200, so we're good. We don't risk overspeeding the flaps. We will configure a little bit earlier because it's a lot of workload. I need to talk you through it. So we're 15 miles. We can go with slats down. So we command slats extend, speed check, slats extended. Now we're leveling off at 4,000. Slats 15 should be extended not later than 3 nautical miles prior to the FAF, the final approach fix, which in our case is PESEX. But we said during the briefing that we're gonna extend actually even flats 15 before PESEX, because with only slats out, you do not actually slow down a 3 degrees glide slope. So we want to slow down a little bit better. So now we are below the next speed. The next speed is 215. We are at 195. We can put down plus 15. We have now intercepted the glide slope. So it goes on to glide slope star. At this point we can put the second autopilot on. That would be more if we did a category 2 or 3. It opened the speed window, because now it's not going to decrease the speed manually, automatically. We need to do it manually. So now we take the speed down to the speed that it was telling us here. Flap, retract, 153. We put that speed there, and that's the minimum speed. You can see here the F, the green F, is the minimum speed at which we can fly with the current flap setting. So 15. So we don't want to set the speed lower than that. So we have glide slope capture. We set the go around altitude. Now that we have glide slope green, we can set the altitude to missed approach altitude, because that's not relevant anymore. We are following the glide slope indication. So 7,000 feet. Now we wait for 2,500 feet when the radio altimeter will be alive. That's the radio altimeter alive. 200,000 feet, 2,000 feet AGL minimum. We do the final deceleration sequence from slats 15, speed to flaps 40. So what we do, speed brakes, we check that they're retracted. Airspeed is below VFE, because that's 205. So we can go now flaps 20. Flaps 20, speed check, flaps 20. We selected flaps 20 at this point on the FCU. We select the V up, which is 129. We can put gear down. There we go. Gear down. Ground spoilers at this point, we arm them. And when we get down, we go flap 40. At this point, pretend we're being clear to land. We put taxi lights, and we set the auto brake. Auto brake, we put it to low. There we go. Braking anti-skid is normal and on. ECAM wheel page. The landing gear is down, and we have 3 green. We check the speed is approaching V up, and we are at V up. Throttle, we have it on auto throttle. Wing anti-ice is off. Exterior lights are all on. Cabin report is received. Landing checklist. We complete the landing checklist, which is landing gear is down, auto brake low, anti-skid on, slats flaps 30, 40, spoilers are armed. Landing checklist complete. 400 feet. Here we will announce land, but our MDA decision altitude was 530. So we still have a while to go. We're at 1,100.
Approaching 03.
And then from here we go to page 35, because there's a lot of other charts in the middle that we don't need at the moment. There we go. So we wait for the minimum, or we can deactivate the autopilot earlier. So we use this button to deactivate the autopilot. I have it bound to my yoke. So 1 to deactivate and 2 to silence the alarm. We keep the auto thrust in the A300 and A310 all the way, always active, because it retards the thrust levers automatically at 30 feet. So keep the auto thrust in, reduce the workload, or if you want you can deactivate it and do it manually, but actually works very well. We start shallowing it. We ballooned a little bit. Very sensitive yoke. There we go. Set for a landing. At this point, we activate the reverser. Go reverser forward. Keep the center line. Below 80 knots, we can put the reverser to idle. Deactivate the auto brake by tapping the brake. And then we can stow the reversers.
Approaching 17.
Taxi speed, reverser are stowed, so we don't see the lights there anymore. After landing, brake fans as required, so let's slow down a little bit and then we continue the checklist. There we go, brake fans as required, so we check the temperature of the brakes, wheel page, 190, a little bit of brake fans doesn't hurt, so we can activate the brake fans over here. Landing lights retract. Strobe lights, select strobe lights to auto when leaving the runway. Ice protection, engine anti-ice is off, wing anti-ice is off, ignition is off, APU, we can start it. If it was a very long taxi, we would delay until closer to the gate, but a small airport here, so we can put master switch to on, start the APU. Ground spoiler disarm. ATC. Standby, so we go here and we go to tune and we can put that back to alt off. Radar, weather radar off, so we put it back to the middle bit and we put it off. And we also put the radar to test. This is difficult to see the notch there. We put it to test because it says, in case of inadvertent switching of the radar to on, no radar emission will occur. Pitch trim. And then we need to make sure that that doesn't visualize. It's a very fiddly little switch. Okay, now it's off. But you cannot see the test. Pitch trim 1 degree nose up, so we reset the elevator trim. There we go. Slat flaps, we retract them to 0. It is recommended to retract flaps step by step to minimize the possibility of jamming, mainly on bumpy taxiway. If the approach was made in icing conditions, or if the runway was contaminated with slush or snow, do not retract the slats flaps until after engine shutdown, once the ground crew has confirmed them clear of obstructing ice. No snow, very rare snow in Lisbon, I would say, so we're okay. Brake temperature. We check again the brake temperature, but we've already started. The fans are still rising for now, of course, it takes a few minutes to settle. After landing checklist, we can do that. After landing checklist, slats and flaps are retracted and is indicating 0 and 0. Transponder as required, so alt off, weather radar is off, spoilers disarmed, and APU is started and available after landing checklist complete. Now turn nose light off before turning towards ground marshal and approaching stand, so let's assume we're turning into this stand. We want to turn all the lights off, not to blind ground crew. Okay, we can start turning on to stand. Parking brake accumulator pressure indication must be in the green band, otherwise when we turn into stand and we apply the parking brake, it will not work. So we can check it's in the green, so we're good to use the parking brake. It is nevertheless not recommended to leave the parking brakes on if you have hot brakes. You need to try and get the chocks installed as soon as possible so that you can release the parking brake and cool down the brakes better. This jetway looks dangerously close. Okay, we'll leave it there. Perfect. At this point we set the parking brake. There we go. APU bleed on. So aircon is taken over by the APU. Engine fuel levers off. So 1 and 2. Off and off. Elapsed time stop. It took us 2 hours and 30 minutes. And we were supposed to do it in 2 hours and 18 minutes. 12 minutes late. Didn't have ATC helping us with some shortcuts. External lights set all lights as required. Switch off beacon once all engines have spooled down. So we're waiting for the engines to spool down. In the meantime, we'll turn the seatbelts off. Now, below 10% is fine. We can turn the beacon off. Slides, we checked that the slides are disarmed, and for the last couple of times they were not disarming. I don't know if you need to do, normally it's all automatic, but these slides, now that with engines off and etc., should disarm. Cabin pressure, cabin differential pressure, we check that is 0. That means that no difference in pressure between the cabin and the outside, and we are on 0, so we can advise the ground crew that cabin and cargo doors can be open. Seatbelts off, ground contact established, parking brake is off once we put the chocks. So what we can do now, we can do ground services, chocks, and at this point we can release the parking brake to help the brakes cool down faster. Fuel pumps go off. All the fuel pumps go off apart from the one that supplies the APU, which is inner tank pump 2 over here. If there is fuel in the tank pump, but we normally leave always that one. So the proof is if you turn it off, it tells you APU fuel pump override fuel supply check and etc. So we leave that one on to keep the ECAM happy. Probe heat, no, window heat, it goes off. 1, 2, 3 and 4. Probe heat off. And then IRS, we check position arrow, ground speed, or drift rate, and etc. But that's always good in the sim. And then that's it. CRTs, we dim the CRTs and we do the parking checklist. Parking checklist. APU bleed is on as required. The engines are off. Differential pressure we checked, it was 0. Lights and signed, the lights are all off and the signs are off as well. Fuel pumps are off, window and probe heat off, parking brake and chocks as required. Parking brakes is off and chocks are on. And that is it. That is a full flight as per SOP in the Inibuilds A300, and this applies identical to the A310. So you can use this tutorial, this checklist for both, and that's why I put A300, A310 there. Now, of course, this file will be made available. I will make a post on the forum. Another thing to add that we haven't discussed is the standard calls. This is quite useful just to go through a couple of times, and it just tells you, well, standard calls, how they should be made, every phase of flight and etc. So this is quite important. And then we have as well minimum recommended fuel. The first page was referring to this one in terms of checking you have enough fuel for the flight. and then standard fuel plan profile again. There's some other bits and bobs, but as I said, I will make a post on the Explain forum making this available so you can grab it for yourself. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope some of you, despite the huge amount of material there is out there on the Inibuilds planes, I still hope some of you will find the content of this video useful. And as usual, if you have any comments, suggestions, recommendations, gripes, you name it, please leave a comment. If you like the video, please give us a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the sky. Thank you very much again, and have a lovely day. Bye now. Take care.